Okay, welcome back. I'm going to record it again for completeness purpose. So, as I said, the topics to be covered will be discussed right now. So, the course description is, as you can see in here, as well as in your curriculum, the course is concerned about the study of human language from a computational perspective, which means we are interested about making the computer to understand or process a human language. So in this case, in the course, we'll be using many examples from Amharic, English, or any other language, and the students are encouraged to come up with their own example using the language that they know, so that we're going to have a broader understanding or perspective of how language can be used for many different languages. But as we said, the most important topics to be discussed is in the course will be about morphology, syntax, semantic, pragmatic processing, and in all this we'll be dealing more on computation, statistical or corpus-based methods, which means rather than rule crafting, would be interested to extract knowledge from a huge collection of sample data using machine learning approach. So we'll be looking into that, and machine learning applications like text summarization, dialogue system, machine translation, parsing, grammar checking, spelling checking, information extraction. All this would be somehow covered or reviewed in the course of, or in the due course of this these topics. So these are the learning outcomes as we have tried to see it in a higher perspective. So as a student, you will be able to describe the major trends and systems in natural language processing. You'll be able to define the important language elements as well as language processing applications like morphology, syntax, semantic, pragmatics processing. You'll be able to define what and explain what syntax and semantics is, and you'll be able to describe what a corpus-based as well as statistical techniques are when it comes to natural language processing. And finally, you'll be able to define and describe many NLP applications that can be developed using a computational system. So saying this, the first chapter would give you, a general overview of what an NLP is. So it is a background and application of natural language processing. So it's the bigger picture would be presented here. So we'll see many different kind of definitions. We'll talk about the coverage and the scope of what natural language processing is. We'll try to see the application of NLP at the same time, which is more important, is to see different kind of approach that we have, or different kind of computational methods that we have to develop an NLP application. Then we'll discuss about the levels of language processing that we have. As we said, language can be presented in many different ways, like in a written form, for instance, you can present it as a word, as a phrase, as a sentence. And whenever you move from a word level to a sentence level, presentation, then we know that there are many linguistic elements that need to be analyzed. So looking into the language from this different perspective is very important. So we'll talk about phonology and phonetics from a speech representation. Then we'll talk about morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and finally, we'll say something about discourse as well. And finally, we'll try to see different views of NLP. And at the end of the first chapter, I'll give you some ideas on how you'll be able to, think and come up with a proposal for your project for the course. So based on the number of students that we have in the class, we'll have a group of 2 or 3 based on the number of students that we have to come up with a project idea. Then finally, you'll be able to, you'll be expected to make documentation, implementation at the same time, presentation and submission of your course project. So the second chapter, after giving you the bigger picture of what natural language processing is, the second chapter would be on morphology. Mind you, I'll take you back to this chapter. If you see in this chapter, we said language can be analyzed from different levels, or from different levels of knowledge. So we have morphology, we have syntax, we have semantics, and it goes on like this. So the chapters that are going to come starting from chapter 2 are concerned about these different levels of language. The first one, as you can see, is about morphology, which is word formation, which is how we can understand words are formed in different languages and how people can write a computer program to manage those words. So concepts like tokenization and word segmentation, which seems to be very, easy at this level, should be discussed. We know that for different language, tokenization and word segmentation is not going to be as simple as we think it would be. We know that most of the time we try to evaluate those methods from the human mind perspective, but whenever you try to do that using a computer program, you're going to face all sorts of challenges, and dealing with that challenge is what makes it interesting. So we'll be talking about stemming, punctuations, number, and lemmatization in this perspective. Then we'll talk about morphological processing by looking into type of morphemes, morphology types, morphological rules, the difference between words and morphemes, and finally, we'll discuss about inflectional and derivation morphology, which is the two types of word formation that we have, in a sense that whenever a morphological process happens to a word, there will be some kind of change that will be happening. And some of the change, we call them inflectional, the others we call them derivational. So we'll be talking about that at the end of the second topic. Now, chapter C is the one which is more practical, which requires you to spend much time on Python or any other programming language to do the implementation. And we'll be talking about parsing and syntax. So you know that as computer science students, you have been writing computer course using different languages. And most of the time you see, whenever you make an error, you see a syntax error. And you also see that the computer program do parsing of your code. So parsing and syntax is concerned about, structures. It is concerned about ordering of things. It's concerned about the validity of what you have presented. So for this purpose, in chapter 3, we'll be talking about first part of speech tagging, which is a very important computational linguistics task or NLP application that is used to assign the word class for a word in a sentence. Like you can have multiple words in a sentence, and for each of the words, deciding whether it's a noun, a verb, an adjective, or whatever is a very critical task. So we'll be trying to see how that can be done using a computer program. Once we do that, we'll also see the concept of syntax and parsing, which is concerned about a valid ordering of words in a sentence. So in here, we'll talk about the concept of context-free grammar and probabilistic context-free grammar, and using these two techniques, how to parse or how to validate the correctness of a sentence would be demonstrated to you. So we'll do this one in a theoretical way, which means by giving you the concepts of parsing and syntax, but at the same time, we'll be writing Python code to make sure that these processes are applicable for many different languages that we have in the world. Then chapter 4 would be concerned about the next higher level. Mind you, as you can see in the first two topics, we have morphology, we have syntax, and we have parsing. Then when we go beyond this one, we'll be concerned about semantics. Semantics is concerned about the meaning of the word in a specific, in a specific setup or in a specific context. So in here, we'll talk about the concept of lexical semantics, which means a meaning that a word or a token has. And whenever that word is used in a sentence, then the semantics or the meaning might be quite different. So we'll be talking about the concept of word sense disambiguation, which means to identify the correct meaning of a word in a specific sentence or whenever you use it in a context. So we'll see the practical problem that we have. We'll talk about what a word sense is and the relation that we have between words. Then we'll talk about lexical semantic, which means a meaning of a word from dictionary perspective. Then we'll talk about the disambiguation process or approach. As you can see, disambiguation is whenever you have a doubt, whenever you have uncertainty, making a decision is what we call disambiguation. For instance, you can have a word in Amharic. Let's have a word. Let's have this word. What do you understand? What is this word? What is the meaning of this word?
The meaning of this word is about ability.
Yeah? Ability of whom? ስለምትችል ማለት ማንን ነው ሪፈር የሚያደርገው?
ሌላ አጠገቡ ያለ ሰው
ማንን እኮ
ኮንቨርት እያደረገ ያለ ሰው ኦር
እሷን ነው ወይንስ አንተን?
አንተን ስለምቺ ነው እሷ ሲሆን አንተን ነው የሚያመለክተው።
እሷ ነው ያልኩት። ስለምትቺማ ሁለተኛ ሰው ነው አይደል? ሰከንድ ፐርሰን ነው። ስለ ሶስተኛ ሴት ሰርድ ፐርሰን ብታወራስ? እሷ ስለምትችል ወይንም አንተ ስለምትችል አይደል? So what is the meaning? Is it referring to እሷ or አንተ?
Both.
Oh, bothማ ሊሆን አይችልም. In a sentence, the meaning is only one.
እንደየሰንተንሱ ይለያያል።
እሺ እንደዚህ ብንልስ?
ስለሷ ነው።
ስለሷ ሆነ ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ይሄንን ልናረግ የቻልነው because of the word that comes after it አይደለም? Let's have another one. Okay? Let's have the word bank. What am I referring to?
Bank, it's not refer any branch or any bank. For all of bank, it works.
What about now?
Okay, it's about river bank.
Okay, you see? Unless and otherwise, a word exists in a context, knowing the meaning will be difficult. So in this case, if you go to a dictionary, the word bank will give you many different definitions. If you see the word bank, there are many definitions that you have in it, okay? So in a dictionary, what you have is a list of possible definitions. But whenever it is used in a sentence, deciding which one is correct. For instance, this might be the first definition of the word bank, this might be the second, and this might be the third. Now, as a human being, when you process a language, deciding which definition of bank that you are referring to in this context is very sensitive. And this is what we call is word sense disambiguation, because the meaning of bank in this case might be the first one, the second one, or the third one from a dictionary. So to make a decision on this one, looking into the word that coexists with it, or it's neighboring, or it's part of speech is very important, okay? This is very important. So whenever you want to do this using a computational system, you need to have a mechanism to disambiguate. And that's what we mean by word sense disambiguation. So word sense disambiguation can be done using a knowledge-based approach, using a machine readable dictionary, or using the concept of selectional preference. So in this chapter, we'll be talking about this concept. The other topic that we'll be talking about is text summarization. As you know, these days we are having many big companies producing text as a news text or as an article or as a report. And many people are concerned about the reduced form of that text. And that's what we call is text summarization. So in this topic, we'll be talking about the application, different type of summarization, single versus multi-document summarization. And finally, even though it's not directly related to summarization, we'll talk about the concept of sentiment analysis, which is concerned about people's feeling being extracted from the text, which means whenever you comment on a Facebook post or a Twitter post, then whatever you write there can actually show how you feel about the article, how you feel about the subject or the content. So identifying whether you have a positive, negative, or a neutral feeling about products, about a news, about any other post can be analyzed from the text that you have written. And that's what we call a sentiment analysis. So we'll try to see this in the fifth topic. The other one, which is not part of your curriculum, but if the class goes very well or with good pace, then we'll be able to see two additional topics, which is speech processing, because it's a very important topic in natural language processing. So in the speech processing topic, we'll be looking into that. We'll have a basic introduction and look into the challenge. Then we'll talk about two important subcomponents of a speech processing system. One is automatic speech recognition, which is concerned about converting the human speech into a text by a computer. We call it speech recognition. And the other one is an electronic document inside the computer can be converted into a speech. And we call that text-to-speech system, or we call it TTS. So we are going to see these two bidirectional processes in this chapter. And finally, we are going to see how to evaluate a speech processing system, whether it is an automatic speech recognition or ASR or TTS or text-to-speech system. The other one, which is a very interesting topic, though it's not part of your curriculum or your course description, is machine translation, which is a very active research area and a very interesting topic. So we'll try to see machine translation. So we'll see the application, the challenge, and the different kind of approach that we have in machine translation. So this would be the topics to be covered in the course. The textbook that we'll be using is the Jarofsky and James, or Daniel Jarofsky and Martin James book. The book is Speech and Language Processing: An Introduction to NLP, Speech Recognition and Computational Linguistics, which is a very comprehensive book. But there are also additional reference materials that you can use. If it is possible, I'll be sharing the textbook and some of the reference materials for your use, but you should be able to consult them whenever you need so. Well, as to the evaluation, this is what I have in mind. What I call activity 2 is going to be, for this specific case, since we have what we call a blended form, would be some kind of test or a mid-term. We'll talk about the proportion, whether 15 would be enough or not. But there would be a project that you're supposed to do in a group, then class participation would account for 10% and final examination. And in addition to that, article 1, maybe we are going to have a scientific article review. So I'll be giving you a scientific article on natural language processing for each of you, and you'll be able, or you should be able to produce a scientific review of that article. So this would be the tentative evaluation rubric that we have for the course. Okay, so that's what we are going to have. If you have any question, let's spend some time then before finishing today's class. We'll say some words. Do you have any question? Do you have any question? Takatal, do you have any question?
Yeah. I have no question right now.
Okay. I know that you are a class representative. Maybe they have given you the question as a representative.
Yeah. For the time being,
Okay.
it's okay. Everything is okay.
Okay, good. Any other question? Andu Gamachu Fakada, Bashir, or Makonnen? Do you have any question? Are we on board? Are we on the same page? Okay, Zanava, you raised your hand. Unmute and you can ask. Zanava, unmute your mic.
Yes, sir.
Unmute your mic. Zanava. Okay. So this is what we have. And when we say a language, as we said earlier, it is a system for communication. And this system of communication can happen in a symbolic or in a sound format. When we say in a sound, it means as human beings, we prefer to use speech as the primary mode of communication, and that's a language. So we use a sound or a speech that's uttered by our vocal tract to communicate, and we use our ear to understand and perceive what has been said. At the same time, we also use a symbolic representation. A symbolic representation depends on the scripting method that we have in every language. Like in English, we use a Latin script. We have Arabic having their own scripting method. We have the Ethiopic script that can be, that is being used for many languages like Amharic, Tigrinya, Ge'ez, Guraginya, and many other languages. So we know that a language is a system of communication using a symbolic or a sound representation. And we use that either to share our experience, concerns, and belief, and to pass it over to the next generation. And languages plays a very critical role in the human development. It is because of language that we are able to transfer knowledge from the one generation to the other, so that we actually, you know, build up on those knowledge and be innovative in every generation. So when you see the nature of the language, all over the world, we have approximately 6,000 languages, and we have, you know, more than 80 languages in Ethiopia, which means that, you know, we are very rich in terms of language. And computational linguistics or natural language processing is highly fertile in such areas, because if you have many languages, it means you can develop many NLP applications. You can research on this one, either as a graduate program or even as a practical researcher or a practitioner. You can develop many NLP application using, I mean, for these many different local languages that we have in Ethiopia. But one thing that we are sure about this one is all languages, even though they have their own peculiar nature, they have their own, you know, unique behavior, they have some basic ways of organization, like how words are formulated, how words are arranged, or how meaning can be extracted, how people communicate using the sound or the written form has its own basic way. As we said earlier, there might have some peculiar natures, peculiar property that might not be shared by other language, but the basic principle or the basic way is one and the same. Like, for example, if you are concerned about a spoken language or a speech, it is you know, a collection of sounds and a rule on how the sound should be put together. Okay, this is a rule. So there are sounds that we use. For example, when I'm, you know, lecturing, when I'm speaking to you, I'm using a specific bits of sounds, and these sounds should be arranged somehow to be meaningful in the language. So what we call a spoken language is the study of the sounds in the language and the rules on how those sounds will be put together. I'll give you a very simple example from the next one. Now, what do you understand from this word? What do you understand from this word?
We cannot understand the...
You can't understand. Why?
Yeah.
Because even though the symbols are used, the rules of putting those symbols together is not in line with the language that we have. But what if I put words like this one? Okay, now you can understand, because you know that, you know these symbols are correct. You know that the arrangement of these symbols will make sense to you. Now, okay, this is climate. What if I put here, like this one? Still, this is not correct, because this is neither Amharic nor English, because the symbol that's used in this word is not consistent. So what we call a written language is the use of the symbols and how those symbols should be combined, a rule on how those symbols should be combined to communicate something. And this is very critical in a language, because most of the time we get confused because either the sounds are not correct, or the symbols are not correct, or the rules of arranging the sounds or the symbols is not correct. And in such cases, we feel the confusion, or we are going to misunderstand those things. At the same time, just like we do it for a spoken as well as a written language, a sign language uses gesture, you know, movement of hand and face, or such kind of movements rather than sound and symbols. But again, those movements have their own rule. How you are going to move your hand, how you are going to coordinate between the first and the second word is very important in sign language as well. So one basic way that we know is, whether it is in a spoken, written, or in a sign language, we have symbols, signs, we have sounds, symbols, and gestures, and we have a rule on how to combine or how to order those elements, okay? So you have to keep this one in mind. Now, whenever you study a language, one of the things that we do is isolating phonemes. Phonemes are the smallest classes of sound that makes a difference in a meaning. We are going to see that when we discuss speech processing in the last chapters, okay? So what we call phoneme from the name itself, when you say phone, it means a sound. So phoneme is the smallest class of a sound that makes a difference. So for instance, just to give you a very simple example, if you see these two words, sorry. If you see these two words, the difference between these two is the phoneme f and the phoneme d. So f and d would make a difference in here. And that difference would affect the meaning, because in the first case we say fog, in the second case we say dog. So this is a phoneme that makes the difference between these two. So whenever you study speech, we are concerned about these phonemes, the phonemes that affect a meaning, that affect the utterance of a specific word. So to determine, okay, determining all group of combination of sounds that seems to have the meaning is very important. Otherwise, you cannot simply put sounds together and it makes sense. Most of the time, if you try to simply combine many phonemes together and try to utter it, people will not understand you, because those sequence of phonemes might not be understandable by the community or by the society. So determine all group or combination of sound that have to, to have a meaning, or that seems to have a meaning, is very important in studying a language. Mind you, this is for a spoken system. In a written system, equivalent to phonemes, what we have is morphemes. Now, morphemes in a written form are the smallest unit in a written form that affects the meaning, that cannot be further divided. Okay, you cannot further divide a phoneme or a morpheme into smaller pieces. For instance, as we said earlier, if you want to have words like walking, you know that you can, split or segment this word only into two. You can say walk, then ing. You cannot do anything beyond this. For instance, if you try to break down the word walk, okay, into somehow like WA and LK, then it doesn't make sense. The word is going to be meaningful only if you combine these two. Likewise, the attachment ing cannot be further divided. You cannot say this is I and ing, or you cannot say this is in and g. It's not possible, which means you cannot further break it down into smaller pieces. So whenever you have the word walking, then you can divide it into two parts, walk and ing, and this makes sense. So what we call a morpheme is the smallest unit in the word that affect the meaning but cannot be further divided. It cannot be further divided into smaller pieces. So determining all groups or combination of morphemes is going to be a very important task in text analysis or in morphological processing, okay? The same is true for Amharic, for example, or for any language for that matter. If you have the word like, let's say, Sabarku, if you have this word, then you can only divide it as Sabar plus Ku. Otherwise, you cannot further divide Sabar into smaller pieces, because if you do that, the meaning of breaking will be totally lost. And you cannot, because Ku actually, the word Ku, the letter Ku means K and U together. So you cannot further divide it into two pieces. Mind you, this is the vowel and this is the consonant. But since the language is syllabic, by combining the consonant with the vowel, we are going to, or we have another form which is K. So Ku, sorry. So we know that you cannot further divide such kind of morphemes. And this is the study that we have in, whenever you study a language, this is a kind of analysis that you are supposed to do. So the level of language description would be this one. Language and communication can happen in a spoken or in a written form. At the same time, language can be analyzed, can be done in a generative form or in analysis form. Generation means producing a language construct, and analyzing means processing or understanding. For instance, if you are asked to make a plural of the word, let's say, bear, let's say you have the word bear, and if you are asked to make it plural, what do you do? Then you are going to add to it watch or something, or oj. So you'll say this would be bear watch, Or there is another method, I'll show you later on when we talk about morphology, ber plus och, okay? Then it will be berroch. So in this case, the correct one is the second one, but we know that watch as well as och can be applied for morphological purpose. So you're going to have this one. So whenever I give you ber, and if I ask you to make it plural, and if you do this one, this is what we call is generation, because you are producing a language, you are producing a word or a construct. But what if you are asked berkum, and what if you are asked to analyze this word? In this case, you have to say it has the prefix al, then you have to say it has the main word sabber, then it has the subject marker ku, then you have the negative marker men. So by doing this, you are trying to understand what the word is. By looking into the middle, you know that this is the action of breaking. By looking into ku, you know that the person who is doing the job is first person singular. It is me. Otherwise, it would have been k. ለምሳሌ k ብናደርገው አልሰበርክም means it means you. If it is she, then it means feminine second person. No, third person. አልሰበርሽም. No, second person. If it is she, አልሰበረችም ስለሆነ it's going to be third person feminine ይሆናል ማለት ነው. So in this case, knowing the meaning of each part is very important. Like, for example, the al and the me are the negative markers, which change the word into negative, because without this two, what would be the meaning of the word? Sabbarku kona, it means I broke. If it is al sabbarkum, it means I did not break. Okay? So if it is sabbark, it means I break something. If it is al sabbarkum, it means I did not break. So al and me together are making the negatives, just like happy and unhappy. So making such kind of analysis, making such kind of synthesis for a word is what we call analysis. So language can be done in a generative manner or in analysis. So generation means producing it. Analysis means understanding the text, or even the spoken form. Mind you, a language can be in a spoken or written form, in generative or analytic form. So to understand the language, what you do is we'll accept new information. We are going to react to a command in natural language, or we are going to answer questions. That's what we mean by understanding a question. I mean, understanding a language. So whenever something is written, you will be able to understand that. You will be able to accept new information, or you are going to react to a command that's given to you. Like whenever I ask you a question, it's only the understanding of the language that allows you to give me a response. And answering the question would be another one. So the problem and the difficult areas that we have in language is vagueness and imprecision of a language. Almost every language have some kind of vagueness for computational analysis, even for human beings, and some kind of imprecision. For example, we have redundancy, which means many ways of the same thing. Okay, like if you see the word see and look, they mean the same thing. So in every language, we have many ways of saying the same thing, and that will confuse a computer. The other one, we also have ambiguity. In this case, ambiguity means many ways of, many sense of a single word. So a single word can have many different meanings. So this is also ambiguous. So it will be difficult for the computer to act. Like, for example, if you see this word, book, it can be the written material book, or it can be the action of reserving. Okay, you can say book my flight, book my hotel. It means it's an action. But if you say give me my book, you're not talking about reservation. Rather, you're talking about a written material. So this is the challenge that we have in a language. The other one, we have non-local interaction between data elements, like words written very far apart can be interrelated with one another, which would be very difficult for the computer to capture. The other one, language has a non-linguistic means of communication or means of expression, like gesture, okay, which makes it really difficult to understand, which makes it really difficult for the computer to process. So these are the most important elements that you have to pay attention to in natural language processing, okay? So I think that would be enough for, as a first class. When we meet next time, we'll proceed with linguistic anomalies and talk about the different language understandings, okay?